The year is 2012, and you are currently strapping a saddle to a pig and riding it off of a cliff. Finally, after several tries and a few sacrificial pigs later, you see the little notification pop up on your screen. The last achievement you needed. No, wait. Let's take it one further back. It's 2008, and you're sitting in front of an off-white, borderline yellow computer cube, either at home or at school, and load up Flash games. You spend the next several hours trying to park a car, drawing the perfect line, or obliterating an old man. However, this time, there's no little box that pops up in the corner when you finally find the most satisfying way to kill your boss. No little achievement telling you that you finished the game or that you did a special weird thing. You're just playing. The history of achievement hunting is hard to pin down in its entirety. Many games originally had no achievements, and then achievements were sometimes later introduced. When doing research, I found out that the first things that I think you could categorize as achievements were literal badges that were sent to players and worn as patches on clothing back in 1982 by Activision for getting high scores. Players would have to take a photo of their score on their TV, get the picture developed, and then physically mail in the photo to receive a physical patch. And as we continue down this timeline of video games developing achievements, eventually we see the development of forums and even step-by-step playthroughs. The introduction of these wiki pages, achievement hunting forums, and playthroughs completely revolutionized the way gamers went about playing video games. A whole new genre of gamer was created, the achievement hunter. Now, there's nothing wrong with achievement hunting in and of itself. I even at one point was a pretty religious achievement hunter. I remember getting every achievement in the Portal 2 campaign in my first run. Naturally, getting every single achievement in my first run through a game like that would not have been possible if it weren't for these forums and everything existing on the internet. I had meticulously written out each achievement and where it would be located in the levels on a notepad, and crossed them off as I went through. Okay, so great. How does this relate to me, a bumbling tarnish stumbling around picking berries and looking for a maiden in 2022? Well, with all the content of a video game now being easily accessed on the internet, and that being the norm, the old feeling of self-discovery and having a unique video game experience has long been unusual. For example, there is an intrinsic difference in the way I experienced my first playthrough of Portal 2 and the way a non-achievement hunter experienced Portal 2. In order to get each achievement, I had to have some awareness of the future content of the game, and because of having some content spoiled for me and being hyper-focused on the achievements, I was experiencing the game differently than a player without that information. Now, I purposely set out to go about the game in this way. I knew I would be getting a different experience than was intended. However, I believe that with the introduction of gaming forums and playthroughs, and them being so easily accessible to players, that even players who don't particularly want to engage with the achievement hunting system have been lured in and wrapped into it in a very subtle and nuanced way. For this video, I will be mainly focusing on how it does this to a lot of Elden Ring players. There's been the development of a new kind of player. Well, okay, this player isn't necessarily new. In fact, they have been around since 2005, when gaming forums really started to become popular. But I believe Elden Ring has been a game that has exacerbated the number of this kind of player, and really put them into the spotlight. Okay, so just because I like little graphs, and I like to conceptualize the things I'm talking about, I'm gonna make a little line graph thingy. On the left, we have achievement hunting. This means looking up things ahead of time, having content spoiled, and a little or a lot of planning. On the far right, we have a gamer who is just playing a video game. Personally, I think back to my Game Boy and DS days, playing games like Mario 64 and not having the slightest clue what to expect when jumping into a painting. This style of gameplay is conducive to having unique experiences within the game, since at the time, information wasn't available for it, and anything you learned would be through self-discovery or through sharing your experiences with friends. Now, in the past, I would have said that these were the two different types of playstyle, a very black or white kind of deal, and there is nothing intrinsically wrong with either way to play. They both have their own merits, but I do think there has been the development of a third kind of player, and they fit right in between the two. And unfortunately, I think this type of player has become the majority of modern day gamers, and most aren't even aware of it. Once again, you're currently probably hovering over another video about to leave because you're like, what does this have to do with my boy Torrent and I? This is supposed to be an Elden Ring video, yeah? Okay. Hold on, you chaotic, maidenless boy. It is because of the release of Elden Ring and the influx of new players that came with it that I have finally been able to analyze the subtly growing anxiety within the gaming community that I've been aware of for a while now, but it wasn't until I played through Elden Ring and talked with other FromSoft gamers that I truly was able to identify what that uneasy feeling was. And that uneasy feeling was a subtle background noise of anxiety of players needing something I like to call the perfect game. The perfect game is the feeling of needing to complete all NPC quest lines, getting every weapon or collectible, or making sure that the ending they get in a game with more than one ending is the most ideal ending. This also includes wanting to complete all NPC quest lines and getting the happiest ending possible for them. I put happiest in parentheses because let's be real, FromSoft doesn't want us to be happy. Also, when I say the happy ending, normally I just mean the ending that was intended if you make it all the way through the character's questline. This third type of player, the one in the middle of the two, is not purposefully setting out to get every achievement. Rather than achievements, they just want to make sure that they don't miss a single bit of content or mess up quests or NPC interactions. A common example I can think of is when an NPC will have dialogue options up on the screen, and a player in this category, out of fear that they might make a choice that will ruin the NPC's progression, will look up which dialogue option to choose, spoiling just enough for them not to make the NPC disappear or change paths, but also spoiling enough for themselves that they don't have an authentic experience and make the choice based off of what they would think. This fits right in between that old style of playing DS or Flash games and with the achievement hunter. So how do you tell if someone is this kind of player? Back to Elden Ring, I believe there's a pretty consistent way to be able to tell if someone, yourself or a friend, has this perfect game mentality, simply by asking them what happened with their Bach quest line. And please let me explain why. So one of my first videos that I made a while back was about balancing content in video games and how it's really difficult to do. I will be taking a clip out of that video to help here, but feel free to check out the whole thing. There is an important line that game developers reference when deciding how to disperse their content. Content meaning encounters and items. So let's take a look at a common way that this line can be visualized. On the far left side of this line, we have encounters or items that the video game designers definitely intended and hope for you to come across. Sometimes even, if it's a little too far to the left of this line, an encounter can feel like the game took your hand and dragged you there against your will. In the middle would be the average, and on the far right, there are encounters and items that the game designers had little to no intention of players to come across. It's important to note that some games do not really have anything that would fall into this right category. For example, in a simple game like Pac-Man, everything was designed with the intention for the player to definitely come across. Whereas in some other games, like Super Mario Bros., it even has some content that's tucked away, hidden in those little tubes that not every player will experience. Another way to go about illustrating this would be by using the percentages of the total players that would come across the item or encounter. For example, the far right side would be representing an encounter or item that only 5% of the player base would come across. The middle, or the average, would be something that 50% of the players would come across. And then on the far left, we would have items and encounters that 100% of players would come across. Okay, maybe just 99%, there's always that one guy. So let's say, for example, there's an item that is super powerful and has some special magical abilities that can increase a player's damage. Ideally, game developers wouldn't want every player in the game to have that item. 1, because then it wouldn't be as special and rare anymore, and 2, because the designers want to reward those players who might have invested extra time into the game to unlock that item or encounter. The second reason is arguably the more important reason, because for that dedicated player base, having rewards of secret endings, extra encounters, or additional items allows them to know that the game developers appreciate and repay that level of dedication to their game. Without it, players have less of an incentive to spend all that extra time. But on the other hand, if the game designers have a main story point in which missing it would lead to being confused, the designers are going to do their best to put that encounter on the far left side of this line. An example of this is how maybe a cutscene will start playing once a player enters into an area to help prevent the chance that a player would miss it. When everything is placed appropriately on this line, players shouldn't be aware that it's even happening. It feels natural and fair. However, when an item or encounter is misplaced, it sticks out. One example of this misplacement occurring happens in Elden Ring with the intended tutorial area. The tutorial area, which naturally should be an encounter that lies somewhere on the left side of this line, went missed by a large majority of players. As a result, many players entirely skipped the introduction to Elden Ring's gameplay mechanics. This misplacement of this encounter stood out, and once enough of a conversation got going around it, it was memed to hell for it. And on top of that, FromSoft even patched in a screen that pops up to tell players in a very obvious way that down that hole is the tutorial, leaning this interaction previously from the right side to the left side of the scale. In Elden Ring's case, the majority of what they place on the left side of the line is story-related content. So, understanding all of this, we can take a look at Bach's storyline. Bach the seamstress is a demi-human that, in comparison to the line, is pretty far to the right when we add all of his components together. First off is his initial location. To even have your first interaction with Bach, it requires a player to explore just slightly off of the main path. But at the same time, it's not super difficult to come across at this point. There are no heavy time requirements or difficult bosses blocking a player's access to him. A player just needs to get in range of him for his dialogue to kick in.
Oi! You there! Could you help us out, Cully? You? Yeah, you there! Stop pretending you can't see me! Oh. What'd you go and do that for?
However, even with him being so easy to access, this requirement of off-path exploration in the massive open world that Elden Ring is cuts out a large section of players who just follow the main path. He's a bush amongst other trees and bushes, slightly away from a grace. So, from getting some input from others, as well as reading some discussions online and using my own experience, I think putting his current interaction on the left side, just about here, for about 60% of players will probably come across him authentically, give or take a little bit either way. The next step of Bach's questline is to go to his next location, which is in the coastal cave. Now, this is hinted at through his dialogue. At first, the player will just hear,
Oh, yes. I remember. Some clod turned me into a tree. You were just breaking the spell, weren't you? Thank you. The name's Bok. I was pushed out of the cave, told not to come back. Not ever. Then I ended up as a tree. Lucky you came along, really.
If they choose to speak to him again, he will say,
Oh, what a shame. When they threw me out of the cave, they took everything I owned. And so this is all I have to express my thanks. I hope you can forgive me. Or, well, if you can afford to wait for a while, I could sneak back into the cave and bring back something of actual value. Then I'd be of some real use to you, I reckon.
And if the player chooses to speak to him once more, he will say,
Right, but I'll need a moment. I'm frightened of them, so I have to gather myself. My knees start knocking, just thinking about that god-awful cave on the shore.
It is not until this last bit of dialogue that it becomes clear to the player which cave that Bach is referring to. Therefore, it is through his dialogue that the player becomes aware of where they would most likely need to go to progress Bach's storyline, requiring the player to exhaust his dialogue. Even though this is not a difficult task, and that the dialogue points the player to the next place, this step will still lose some players simply because it's another step. With each mandatory step in an NPC's questline, it is natural for a small percentage of players to fall off due to the nature of gameplay. Wandering to the cave alone, the player has several opportunities to get curious about something else and begin exploring that instead, due to the sheer size of the world, or by telling themselves that they'll do the cave later because they're more interested in the main storyline. There's also the chance that a player didn't realize they should go to the cave, or didn't get through all of his dialogue to know which cave. So this loses a few players. Being generous, I'll say only about 5%. Once you find him in the coastal cave, you speak to him, complete the cave, and return his lost item. This next section, which I will simply refer to as the location section, requires the players to come across Bach in 3 separate locations. Naturally, coming across Bach in a world that is this large and non-linear, on average is actually quite difficult. The first location will be in Liurnia at the Grace by the Church of Irith. Most players will find him here, for he is next to a main grace after exiting the Stormvale Castle. However, his next locations are not as obvious. Even though the locations are next to graces, the 2 locations next to the East Rea Lucaria Gate and the Altus Highway Junction are not areas that a player will necessarily go to and rest at. It's important to note that a player needs to rest at the grace Bach is near in order for him to appear. And I know on my playthrough I had originally missed him at the East Rea Lucaria Gate site. So all of this together, for the location section being generous, this would also knock off about 10% of players. And for the sake of clarity and time, I will skip to the ending of his questline, which has the strongest evidence for why his questline is the furthest thing from intuitive. When you meet Bach at this pivotal questline point, he will be in the capital. It is at this point where he will have the dialogue about not feeling beautiful.
Master, have you ever wished you might be born again? Well, they say that Renala of Rea Lucaria has the power to help people be reborn. Oh, me? Reborn? Oh, look at me. When you're this ugly, well, being reborn, it would hardly make a difference, I'm afraid.
Bach seems to have pretty bad self-esteem issues, and here is where the player has 3 options. One option is to offer him a larval tear, and another option is to do nothing. Now, if you do either of those options, he will die. The third option is to use essentially a rock, in which you might not even have to tell him he's beautiful. There is no prompt for you to make this choice. It must be something that you think of on your own. And here is where I run into a fundamental problem. At no point throughout the game has it been established through gameplay, item description, or dialogue that using one of these stones actually affects an NPC. When playing Elden Ring, most players know that they are frequently and commonly used in PvP, to say hello or to be funny.
Hello. Hello. Wonderful. Let's get to it.
I would not have as many problems with this being unintuitive if previously the game had an NPC use it, or we used it towards them in a cutscene, or whatever. Just some form of establishment prior that it is a working mechanic in the game. There is also the problem of naturally finding this stone. To acquire the stone, you need to head to a hermit village in Mount Gilmere. Now, I am a chronic explorer, meaning I love to comb every little nook of the game, often before progressing the main plot line out of fear that it will lock me out of content. And I'm not saying that just because I had this experience that everyone did, but I'm just sharing that me, a fucking fiend for looting everything, missed this speaking stone. So, if you speak to Bach about not feeling beautiful and you don't have this stone already on you, you're fucked. When you rest, he will be gone and that's that. But even if you do have this stone, you have to think to use it. And this is the part that I feel is the least intuitive and will lose the majority of players. And lastly is the problem with the option of giving him the larval tear.
My lord, what's this? It can't be. From my rebirth.
I came across a comment that I felt perfectly summed up my logic for giving him the larval tear. It says, "In a party with friends having the time of my life, loving how Bach is the only nice thing in this game, give him a larval tear because I was like, here you go, buddy, anything for you. Then my friend goes, oh yeah, if you give it to him, he dies. My heart dropped. Plus, I had like 10 or 12 larval tears, so I really didn't mind."
But these are precious. Are you certain that it's for me?
Oh yeah, of course, buddy. Anything for you.
Oh, my lord. How did you know? It was my only wish that I might honor you with a decent appearance.
What? No, wait, shit. No, I don't care what you look like. I thought you wanted it to, like, help with a birth defect or something, or to, like, make you live longer.
I'm off to see Renala of Rea Lucaria. I'll be reborn, fresh and new.
No, fuck, shit, undo.
Immediately upon giving him the larval tear, his dialogue let me know that I had made a massive mistake. I desperately was hoping that I would be given an option to tell him that he was worth it, or to try to take the larval tear back. It didn't make sense that I couldn't just physically tell him that through the normal dialogue options. So altogether, it is not just the one factor, it is all of them combined that creates this collective sludge that borders on the line of feeling like random chance in order for all the pieces to come together.
Yeah, the only thing that, if he wasn't near Grace, I'd immediately drop his encounter rate to, like, I don't know, 30%.
I don't know, I'm just trying to balance how much fucking content would be required to understand why it's not intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you list out some of the reasons again?
You have to go to the correct Graces. You have to understand that the great rune that you have is what prevents you from dying from rebirth, and Bach doesn't have that. You have to find the rock, and you have to know to use the rock. Is not something that's ever been done before in one of these games. To find the golden sewing needle to give to him, you have to buy remembrance armor. Champion armor, otherwise his questline won't be progressed.
From my friends and my own experience, 2 of them did not know Bach even existed until I mentioned them, but one friend actually managed to keep him alive successfully, and me, who got so darn close to keeping him alive, failed at the very last moment and frantically wanted an undo button because I knew I had messed up.
What?
Overall, I believe it is very safe to say that simply by asking someone what happened to their Bach questline, specifically if their Bach somehow didn't end up dead and they got the happy ending, that they statistically were probably looking up things along the way. And I totally get the urge to look everything up. It really sucks when an NPC that you enjoy suddenly dies or you mess up their questline, sending them down a bad ending. I was distraught when I realized Bach was dead.
No. What?
So why is it worse in Elden Ring? This anxiety about needing the perfect game was present in the previous FromSoft games. However, it's really been highlighted in Elden Ring due to 2 large factors. 1, the sheer number of NPC quest lines, and 2, how easy it is in comparison to past games to mess up these NPC quest lines due to the open world design. There are over 30 separate quest lines in Elden Ring. Naturally coming across each one, remembering where you are in each questline and not progressing too far and locking yourself out from experiencing the rest, it can quickly become overwhelming. And the second fact that this FromSoft game is open world provides players with many opportunities to accidentally progress too far in one direction, accidentally becoming overleveled for other areas, missing out on NPCs entirely just because they didn't come across it, etc., etc. Now, to play devil's advocate on behalf of FromSoft and Elden Ring, in interviews, it has been shared that they did not design the game with the intention of all players coming across all of their content. It actually sounds like they wanted to try to reinstill some of that wonder of self-discovery and exploration, and to give the game tons of replay value. However, when a game takes 80, 90, 100 plus hours to complete, I feel as though many players are going to want to try to get everything done their first time through, because of the sheer quantity of hours that this game requires a player to invest. So why does it matter? Why does any of this matter anyway? Well, that's why I am making this video. My intention is not to shit on anyone who does this. Hell, I end up doing this all of the time. The one time I tried to break myself free from this frustrated anxiety by just playing, my boy Bach fucking died. So it's gonna be a process for me to withdraw. But why does it matter? Why does it truly actually mean anything at the end of the day? If I or you are happy playing the games this way, then so what? And to that point, that's fair enough. But if and only if you are truly, actually happy. Because by no means do I want to discredit that possibility. There are people in certain games where looking things up and following a playthrough or forums can be the most enjoyable option. But my trouble with this, and the whole reason why I felt impassioned to make this video, is because I don't think the majority of players are actually fulfilled or deeply happy by playing this way. You don't get the fulfillment of knowing you figured it out and accomplished it yourself. It can feel more like a plug and play. I'd love to share an example with you of something I desperately wish I could take back and regret looking up. It was something in a game called Nier Automata, or Nier Automata. Please don't hurt me if I got it wrong. In this game, a game that is fucking amazing, and if you want a video on it, please let me know in the comments. Anyways, this game has many different endings, and one of the endings is super meta. It requires you to delete your entire game saved file. Like, all of it, meaning you can't go back and get a different ending or explore anymore. That save file is gone permanently. Now, this blew me away. I was like, wow, that's an ingenious way to encourage your players to play through the game again, and it tied into the narrative perfectly. So I backed out of it with the intention of coming back to that ending once I had done everything else. But upon looking it up, I learned that you don't have to actually do it to get the ending. It still counts if you just exit out.
All of your data has been deleted.
And there are tons of other examples just like this throughout the last several years of my video gaming experience that I wish I could take back. I think everyone is allowed to have their own opinion on this matter. What you might enjoy is not necessarily what someone else might enjoy. If for you, making sure all your NPCs get their perfect ending before you beat the final boss is what makes you happiest, then honestly go for it. But I think there is an important differentiation that needs to be made here. There's a difference of doing this sheerly out of a completionist mindset versus an anxiety-ridden mindset of not wanting to miss out, better known as FOMO. When doing research for this video, it was reaffirming when I came across a small Reddit thread of people who were expressing this exact feeling. These people are that third type of player, and from the sounds of it, they're sick of it. The thread is called, "Why do I feel the need to collect everything in a game on the first run-through?" And they share what I feel is a very common experience. Whenever I start a new game, I always have this urge to look up guides that tell me where every single collectible and missable item is in the game. There's a part of me that wants to play the game with a guide as to not to miss a single one of these items, but I also want to play the game spoiler-free and enjoy it as I go. Reading a guide as I play effectively warns me about every enemy encounter and story beat before I get to it myself. This cognitive dissonance between the two desires leaves me feeling frustrated with myself. Does anyone else deal with a similar feeling? If so, how do you deal with it? And scrolling through and reading this thread, you can read about people who have become self-aware of how this subtle anxiety has been slowly increasing and ruining their gaming experience. Here are a few notable quotes that I feel are appropriate to share. "I've gotten to the point where I actively tried to ignore that feeling, as all it does is ruin the game for me. While I would never look up a guide, I do look at every nook and cranny in most levels, but even that behavior can ruin the feeling of a game for me. This is something I've been dealing with a lot during my teen years. Never dealt with this as a child playing games. I was like that in my teens, to the point of where I was consulting guides and or using save states to just clear everything 100% on my first try if possible. I forced myself to play through games without save scumming or resorting to guides. It was a massive pain at first, but now I'm much happier for it." And if I took anything away from reading this Reddit thread, and hopefully you can too, it's that I want to be a lot like this last guy. To force myself to rediscover that childlike wonder of a video game when I wasn't looking things up all the time. And yeah, it probably will be a massive pain at first. I mean, it already is. I fucking killed Bach, but I hope to come out the other end better off for it. I then asked a friend in real life how they felt about this, and this is what they had to say. He said, "If I'm going to spend all this time playing these games, I want to have the best ending I can." I completely sympathize with that. Spending 80 hours in a game just to have an NPC die because you accidentally overlooked something really sucks. To be more precise about my argument, I think video games should offer players a healthy world to escape to, where real-life anxieties are let go temporarily and not reflected. And sometimes, instead of letting these anxieties go, I've seen them exasperated by this need to have everything be perfect in the game. Life is not perfect. It's beyond messy, chaotic, and full of tragedy. Something FromSoft games embodies throughout their storytelling and game design. I think the need to have these perfectly completed quest lines with every NPC, ironically, goes against what FromSoft is trying to tell through their stories. They are trying to tell the story of the brokenhearted, or the betrayed, or the forgotten, just feeling alone and completely lost. And somehow, through all of that, finding meaning in it all, and finding the strength to continue on. And I get it, it's a video game, maybe it isn't so deep, but maybe next time, flirt with the idea that perhaps the perfect game isn't a game where you have every item, every NPC quest completed perfectly, and the best ending. That maybe it's the game where you play it without that nagging anxiety in the back of your mind, telling you that you're missing out, and instead you find yourself fully immersed in your own little world. And yeah, maybe that will mean that when your friends talk about it, you might have no idea what they're referencing, but at least you can say that it was yours. Thanks for watching. Until next time.